Hi guys, today's video is all about busting some myths surrounding carbohydrates. And we're often told that carbs make us fat, and in today's lecture I want to show you why this is or isn't the case. So let's get into it. Carbohydrates are known as CHO in the scientific world, and it's the chemical makeup of a carbohydrate. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's the makeup of carbs. So I just wanted to get that in there because I'm a nutritionist and, I want to sound all intellectual and stuff. Also, we're going to touch on insulin today, right? And the thing about insulin is it regulates the level of sugar in your blood. It allows glucose into the liver, muscles, and cells, and your fat cells. And this is an important process which we'll touch on. And we're often taught that insulin and carbohydrates, they are the devil. And anything that increases insulin increases fat storage, right? So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at, is a low carbohydrate diet better for fat loss? Is sugar addictive because we're all snorting sugar, let's face it? And is an increased meal frequency better to keep insulin steady? And we're going to look at this bottom one quickly before we move on. Look at our graph here, right? At the minute, it's shown we have 3 meals per day, and insulin does peak and then it does fall 3 times per day, right? However, I want you to think about, if you increase your meal frequency, you are going to have more peaks and troughs. Is that keeping your insulin steady, or is it just increasing it more times per day? So that whole, you've got to eat more to keep insulin steady, is a myth. So on face value, low carbohydrates may appear to be more effective for fat loss. And the scientific evidence does show that obesity is associated with high insulin. People who can't process insulin, known as insulin resistance, where sugar gets essentially trapped in the bloodstream, oxidizes and causes all sorts of issues. Often taught that carbohydrates make people hungry, so they overeat on carbs, or overweight people are carb intolerant, sugar's the devil, blah, 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 blah. Note, I've put this in here, you will produce, or your body will produce insulin without carbohydrates. So that is something to be aware of. So when people say carbs raise insulin, well, protein does too. So when you eat carbs, insulin goes up. And as I've said in the opening couple of slides, this is a normal process in the body, and it's a necessary process. If this doesn't happen, chances are you've got type 1 diabetes, right? A couple of studies here to show you. Evans et al. 1999, he showed that if insulin was low, fat could still be synthesized and stored in the body. So he's saying it's not carbs making you fat, it's an abundance of other factors. As well, higher insulin responses have been shown to correlate to less food intake. So when you eat, high fiber carbohydrates, for example, you get more satiety out of that, meaning you are going to eat less in the preceding hours after that meal. Also, I want to have a look at the kitovans. Mention the kitovans, and these live in the blue zones, known as the healthiest populations in the world, and they eat a 69% carbohydrate diet, but they have the best health. They've got lower cholesterol, they're living longer, and they've got better health. So you know what I mean? If these guys are eating a high carbohydrate diet, why are we told that we must eat low carbs to lose weight and be healthy? So let's look at this study just to, put some evidence on the bones. This was carried out by an excellent researcher called Kevin Hall, and he took 17 overweight patients and put them in a metabolic ward for 8 weeks. And this is the gold standard of scientific research, meaning they control every single factor. So on month 1, they put them on a baseline diet, which was similar to what they were eating previously, lots of sugary, high carb food. Then in month 2, they put them essentially on the same calories and same protein as month 1, but they ramped fat up and took carbs down. And they measured insulin production, energy burned, and fat loss with less carbs. And although insulin did drop in week 1, and there was a small increase in energy burned, up to 100 calories, that was only during the first 1 to 2 weeks. And a lot of low carb gurus will say, well, the low carb approach will help you burn up to 500-600 calories per day extra. And this study's shown that it just wasn't the case. The low carb group actually took 28 days to lose the same amount of fat as they did in the last 15 days on the high carbohydrate diet. And the high carbohydrate diet wasn't even designed for fat loss. So this showed a lack of statistical results. Dairy and insulin now, what often, this is probably going to be new knowledge for a lot of you. Dairy is a highly insulinogenic food source. And I don't know about you, but I was often told that if you ate white bread, that would raise insulin and you'd gain fat, and it wasn't good. But this study by Nielsen et al. 2014 showed that dairy raised insulin more than white bread, and there's the evidence to prove that. Ignore that graph for now on the bottom. Don't know why that's popped up. So that is something to be aware of with dairy. But in numerous studies, it's often showed that people improve fat loss on diets with inclusion of dairy. So dairy is good for us. It contains a lot of vitamins, a lot of minerals, stuff like that, a lot of calcium, That old saying, milk is for babies because it helps you grow. And I want to mention, right, protein will cause an insulin I'll just reverse there a second. Protein will cause an insulin release. This study shown on weightology.net showed the difference in insulin release is between a low protein, high carbohydrate group and a high protein, low carbohydrate group. And you can see the difference there. So protein will cause an insulin release. I'm going to look at now, can we turn excess carbohydrates into fat? And although we can do that, it is a very expensive process for the body to carry out. And the main reason we are fat is an excess of calories, lack of movement, and just lack of attention to our health and lifestyle. So we can do convert excess carbs into fat using, your body causes this process called de novo lipogenesis, and it's a conversion of excess carbs to fatty acids. And as I've said, it's a very demanding process, and you have to have extreme intakes of like 1,000 grams of carbohydrates. You watching this won't be having 1,000 grams of carbohydrates, so that is not to be worried about. Again, just to show you the evidence regarding that, overfeeding from just over 3,500 calories to 5,000 calories at 86% carbohydrates. Carbohydrate oxidation increased. So what that's telling us is when we consumed more carbs, all the body did was burn more carbs. So it increased from 74 grams to almost 400 grams. So when you overeat on carbs, you're just burning more carbs, and fat doesn't really get tapped into. Just some statistics on stored glycogen and fuel in the body. Your liver can store up to 80 to 100 grams of glycogen. Muscles are 400 to 800 grams, and your blood 0.9 grams a litre. With this particular study, glycogen stores had to increase by 500 grams before getting converted to fat. Is sugar addictive, right? We're often taught is, oh yeah, sugar's addictive, oh don't eat sugar, you'll be addicted to it. And a lot of the research that showed this is coming from animal studies where they compared sugar to cocaine, got them hooked on cocaine, then introduced the sugar to rats, and the rats switched over to the sugar. Now, are you a rat? Because I'm not a rat. And often animal studies don't correlate over to human studies. But sugar can light up your reward system of the brain. It can increase dopamine. When we increase dopamine, it makes us happy. And when we start mixing sugar with fat, it tastes nice and it makes us feel good. And then, an hour later, we feel guilt and we start to blame ourselves. And I wish I didn't eat all that. So sugar isn't addictive. We just enjoy it. And as I've already sort of said, we add sugar to increase palatability of food. How much white rice could you eat with nothing on? But if you add some sweet chili sauce to the rice, then what happens? You can eat more of it. Potentially though, maybe sugar doesn't send the signal to the brain to stop eating. Whereas if you have protein and vegetables, that sort of sends, and even carbohydrates to some point with high fiber in, that'll send a signal to the brain to say, listen, I've had enough, let's stop eating and we won't overeat. So summarizing low carbohydrate diets for increased fat loss. And it's often the case that they worked for you, so you've got a personal bias because you went on a low carbohydrate diet, you lost weight, so it worked for you, so you try to get that bias onto everybody else. Or it worked for Steve in IT, he cut carbs and he lost loads of weight. Yeah, but because he cut carbs, he cut a food group out and he essentially cut calories. Normally when people go on a low carbohydrate diet, protein intake increases. Again, protein is associated with more satiety, will end up fuller for longer. And because sometimes with a low carbohydrate approach, we've got that increased buy into the diet. We've took action. Yeah, I've cut carbohydrates. I'm in for the long haul. Let's do it. The thing about carbohydrates is 1 gram of carbohydrates or stored glycogen binds to 3 grams of water in the body. So when you essentially cut carbohydrates, you lose water out the body, which is stored glucose. You see what I'm saying here? So you can see if you've got a sponge, right? If you've got a sponge, which is, let's say the sponge is without the carbohydrate, you put that sponge into water, the sponge gets heavier. And that's a similar thing what happens in the body. Don't know if that was a good analogy or what. I'm 12 minutes in, I'm going to keep going. But if you're insulin resistant, then it's probably wise to start reducing carbohydrates. Although the jury's still out on that one, it can be helpful, and there is evidence to suggest that, if you've got diabetes, for example, type 2 diabetes, then it will be beneficial for you to start dropping carbohydrates down a touch and increasing exercise to help with that. And let's be honest, it's easy to cut carbs on a diet. It eliminates any guessing, so that's why we get results. If you tell someone you need to eat all of these different types of protein, people can become overwhelmed and you might not get them results and you'll just end up defaulting back to what you did before. And normally when you cut carbohydrates out, you increase the nutrient density of your meals because you've cut carbohydrates out. You need something in there to compensate, and it's normally a case of putting vegetables in there. So I've been going on 14 minutes. I'll probably break these videos down into smaller chunks, but I hope this video was useful. If it is, give us a like, give us a share, give us a comment. If it's not, then, oh well, I'll catch you next time.